variety of credentials afterwards, but basically I'm a therapist in private practice that works with adolescents, adults, and families. So our practice, New Jersey Recovery and Wellness, so we have two office locations. One is in Florham Park, that's our most local, and then there's another one in Cherry Hill in South Jersey. The practice does focus on working with both mental health as well as substance use disorders. A majority of our clinicians working with, again, teens and families in addition to working with adults. There's a variety of different subject areas that some of our clinicians specialize in. I'm not going to use too much of the time to serve as like a commercial for our practice. However, yeah, we are an outpatient counseling group. We provide mental health as well as substance use services in both Florham Park and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, as well as offering virtual services so we can be accessible to anyone within the state. So the program today is values-based parenting. This program has kind of been something that's ever-changing and in the works. Its original permeation actually came from a separate, slightly different presentation called values-based counseling. That was more geared towards a professional audience, providing training for other professionals, counselors, social workers, marriage and family therapists, etc., looking at integrating values-based work into their own practice. So for today, we're shifting this to a parenting lens. And so I know that a majority of us who are viewing this presentation may not be therapists. And even if you are a therapist, if you're here, I imagine you're here because you're a parent. And so this is the primary role that we're going to be focusing on today, values-based parenting. So first and foremost, we're going to kind of like go down this path here, understanding values, what they are, how we define them, why they are important when it comes to especially our interactions as parenting with our teens, young adults, adolescents, however you want to phrase that. Then we're going to focus a little bit on understanding adolescent development. Talking about some parenting skills that can be crucial during this phase of life, therapeutic tools when it might be appropriate to bring in a third-party support. Then there's going to be a little bit of a process-based exercise I'm going to walk us through. I do encourage active participation here. So if you have a couple of moments to gather a piece of paper and a pen, we'll be walking through just the format of this presentation. You don't have to share. You won't necessarily have the capacity to share, but I do ask that you do take the moment to be reflective as we kind of walk through that exercise. The hope and intention is that this is something that you will be able to do with your kids, with your family, or possibly have conversations in that vein with your teens and family. And then finally, of course, we're just going to wrap everything up together and hopefully highlight on some takeaway points. So first and foremost, let's dive into understanding values. What are values, right? So, let's not just make up words and definitions. Let's actually go to the dictionary. These sets of definitions actually come from the Oxford Languages Dictionary. So values, the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. Person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what's important in life. This tends to be the most prominent point that comes up whenever I'm talking about this with professionals or when we're starting to review some of these concepts in therapeutic sessions with adolescents or adults. It's, what are values? They're the things that are really important to you in life. Sometimes people will also align them to morals or moral standards. Morals can sometimes have a religious connotation to them. I know not everyone is religious and you don't have to be, but whether you call them morals or values or just generally things that are important, we're talking about the same thing. Why are values important? For a lot of us, they tend to be like this idea of a North Star, like a guiding direction. If I have a gut feeling, that gut feeling that's in there is usually because something that I'm experiencing is either aligning with my values or is completely distancing myself from my values. If the gut feeling is a little bit queasy, that's clearly going to lean in the latter direction. If the gut feeling is a little bit drawing towards whatever's happening in my environment, there's a strong possibility that it might be aligned with my values, or it might be something that's just getting those neurons going in my brain, wanting me to work towards some dopamine or some endorphins. But anyway, so much of what we encounter for anyone that's accessing mental health services is that there tends to be like a disconnection from themselves, from others, or from living life on life's terms. So if a person is entering into therapeutic service, it's very rare that everything's peachy, everything's going well. There's usually some identified problem, some discontent, right? So the way that we take a look at this from a values perspective is something is misaligned, and some of the work might be about trying to understand, discover what that is, and try to find some functional solutions. So, of course, when we're disconnected, in a sense, we feel lost or unfulfilled. And then ultimately, if this stays this way for a long time, if we're not able to adapt and adjust and get back on course, a person can experience some symptoms. And so some of that symptoms, this can look like acting inwardly. So this might be a person that's withdrawing, perhaps feeling some symptoms of depression, etc. Or they may act out. And there's a variety of acting out behaviors. This could be acting out physically with violence. This could be acting out with substance use behaviors, other numbing behaviors, etc., other compulsive behaviors. By turning to our values, by turning to our North Star, we can gain some clarity about what the bigger picture is, and hopefully have that guide our future steps to be a little bit more aligned with ourselves. I'm going to be talking about those concepts a little bit more when we get to that values identification activity. Now, let's spend some time talking about adolescent development, first by defining what is adolescence. And so, no, adolescence, not adolescent, right? So, adolescence, going to the dictionary here, this time it's Merriam-Webster, we're talking about the period of life when a child develops into an adult, the period from puberty to maturity, terminating legally at the age of majority. So here, contemporarily in the United States, our age of majority is 18, right? So this age is going to be different from country to country, but for us here, it is 18 years old. I'm going to be talking in a little bit about how 18 really is not the end of adolescence. So adolescence is not determined by an age. We'll talk about that in a moment. So another definition, the state or process of growing up. So is a person really truly grown up at the age 18? I would argue no, emphatically no. And then finally, a stage of development prior to maturity. And again, maturity is a little bit subjective. You know, some individuals may be more mature than others. They may mature faster than others. So it's not really fixed on a particular age of majority. So what is the developmental change, or what are the developmental changes we can find during adolescence? I remember way back when, likely maybe about 17 or 18 years ago, when I was very, very early in my career. At the time, I was running an intensive outpatient program for adolescents, and my mentor, my director, my supervisor, he had an education series that he would always run for adolescent clients and their families. It's always very, very important to make sure that families are involved and plugged in when doing adolescent work. But one of his presentations was on adolescent development, and lots of Q&A, lots of interchange and interplay. And so one of the things that he would end up doing, asking the audience, who was mixed, teens as well as parents, is, not only how do you define adolescence, when does it begin, when does it end? So, okay, it begins with puberty, ends with being developmentally mature. What we know from literature, from brain science, etc., is that the brain really doesn't get there until we're in our low to mid 20s. I'd argue more towards the mid 20s, and so we take a look at adolescence, really kind of lasting somewhere from when do people start off with puberty? Maybe a mixed range between age 9, age 11. So we're using that frame as a start point. And adolescence really isn't concluding until we've completed that brain maturation process. So when our prefrontal cortex has been a little bit more formalized, more solid, right? So it's more towards our mid-20s if we're males. And then, of course, as they say, females develop a little bit more faster than us. So it might be the early to mid-20s for some females. Okay, so at the beginning of this phase of development, what does functioning look like? So pre-adolescent functioning, children, right? They're dependent, pretty much explicitly dependent on other people. They're functioning with very few personal responsibilities. Their understanding of self is wholly derived from things that are around them. It's derived from social input, from environmental input. So, of course, parents, you're involved in some of this social input, but this is also coming from peers, friends, from school, other individuals that might be key figures in their life. As well as other socioeconomic or environmental factors, things that might be out of our control, where we live, some cultural norms of where we live, etc. And then finally, any decision making power, authority, or skills that they have, it's going to be somewhat inconsequential. It's not going to be anything that's life shattering or life changing. Whereas with post-adolescent functioning, when we're determined to be an adult, like what does that look like? How do we know when a person has met adulthood, aside from they've reached an age of majority, or their brain has finished maturing, so in their early to mid 20s. So what does that look like for a person that's in post-adolescent functioning? So this is a person that is independently functioning outside of their family of origin. They're able to take care of themselves. They're grown, right? Now, when I say grown, again, I'm not specifying an age. I'm really specifying a set of skills that is developed over this time period. They have a sense of direction, self-worth, a sense of purpose, and identity. This is required in order to have that independent functioning from that family of origin. If I didn't have a sense of direction or a firm sense of identity, I would still be dependent on family or others to kind of provide some of that direction. And then finally, decision making is appropriate for consequential life events. If I am developed and prepared, I'm able to make the decisions to support pivotal changes that go on throughout the course of life. So what I want to really break down for you is something that I have learned as the equation for this change process. So we're going to walk through it for a moment. I'm going to give an example, and then I'm going to highlight a crucial factor and walk through a few things. So generally, first and foremost, if everything in life was perfect, if there was no tension in life, we would never have to change. We'd constantly stay the same. We'd never have to take on responsibility, right? For those of you that are familiar with the various forms of stress, there's eustress and distress. Eustress is the motivating stress. It's the stuff that gets us up out of the morning, can get us to be a little bit more goal oriented, have a little bit of pep in our step, making our mental checklists, or sometimes writing them out physically, and then moving forward and taking care of business. Whereas distress tends to be what we commonly refer to as stress, and these are obstacles that come up in life that sometimes we have to pivot around, rethink things, game plan a little bit differently, and then reapproach to hopefully resolve some of those issues to then be able to move forward. So in order to develop some adult life skills, we need to experience conflict. Parents, I know sometimes we can have like mixed feelings about this. So sometimes we can be very much of the mindset of kids, you got to figure it out. There you go. And other times, one of the key pieces that can be very, very difficult for a parent is seeing their children struggle. And when we have the wherewithal, when we have the knowledge or other ability to resolve issues for our kids, sometimes we jump in and take care of it because we don't like to see them struggle. We don't like to see them in pain. We'll talk about a little bit more towards the end of this segment, but that struggle, that stress is a requirement for the change process. So we go about life. eventually something isn't going to go our way. There's going to be some obstacle, some barrier, there's going to be some conflict. So what happens as a result of this? We experience some level of stress, right? So the event itself is an event, it is not an emotion. However, it can trigger the emotion. It triggers a stress reaction. There's many different things we can do with a stress reaction. The hope is that this stress reaction is going to lead to motivation, right? So I'm going along, doing my thing. There's a barrier, an obstacle that comes up. It's stressful. I'm not able to do what I'd like to do. The situation did not pan out the way I would hope it would pan out. Now I have this emotion, I have this stress. I can choose to just sit in the stress and do nothing and not be able to move forward, or I can try to figure ways to work with the stress, move past the stress, try to negotiate, so on and so forth. So that's what this motivation is doing. The intent, the hope here, is that a person is going to be able to identify some alternatives. What are viable options to try to work through this stress and move past this conflict? Right? So think about, if you have kids that are in, I believe they start to introduce this in middle school, but peer conflict resolution. What are we doing? There's an obstacle, there's an argument, a dispute between peers. Let's try to resolve the conflict. How do we resolve the conflict? We need to work through the stress. We need to address it. We can't just go back, ignore it, or not address it. We're not going to move forward that way. We're not going to get to a resolution. So we experience the stress. Hopefully we're turning it into motivation, identifying some alternatives. One of those alternatives, maybe it's the first one a person tries, or maybe a person has to try a couple of different alternatives to be able to find something that works, that's successful, that helps them move through that conflict, helps them identify a solution. Now, typically, if we identify a solution, this is something, you know what, this is great. This is a great tool. Hopefully, this is something that I can use for future conflicts to be able to move through other stressful periods in my life. I'm going to hold on to this, right? So I'm going to share an anecdotal story. Maybe there's other people that would be able to relate, but this is definitely me. So imagine Paul at, let's say like 3, maybe 4 years old. So much smaller, a lot less gray, and kind of like teeter-tottering around. Well, 3, 4 years old, you're walking fine, so on and so forth. So maybe I'm not teeter-tottering, but anyway, going into the kitchen in our house, the cookie jar sat on top of the refrigerator. So going in, hungry, taking a look around. And I see the cookie jar on the top of the fridge. It was a glass one, so you could see what was inside, and every now and then the cookies would change up, so you could get a sneak peek. So see the cookie jar, see if there's cookies inside the cookie jar. What's up? I want cookies. What's the conflict? I'm 3. The cookie jar is on top of the fridge. I can't reach, so I can't have what I want. This is a stressful situation for a 3-year-old. So there's a variety of options here. What might some of those options be? If we were in person, I'd be asking the crowd to kind of like shout stuff out, maybe things that you've done in the past, and hopefully someone would stumble on my situation here. But in some cases, there might be a little kid that gets so stressed out he's not able to work through the problem. He can't figure it out, and so he just kind of crumbles and starts to cry. Mom or dad might run in. Oh, what's wrong? So on and so forth. Are you okay? Cookie. Like, all right, so that's one option. Another option, the kid might freeze. They might shut down. Guess that's not me. Guess I can't get what I want. All right, and then be sad, perhaps a little bit dejected, and then go about doing 3-year-old business. Neither of those options were me. So I turned my stress into motivation to do something about it, and I became the kitchen cabinet climber. So pulling on drawers, opening cabinets, shimmying my way onto the countertop, and then doing some weird like lateral move with the upper cabinets and like swinging over and reaching onto the fridge. And so, of course, my parents kind of like intercepted me just before I was getting on top of the fridge, or at least the story is told. I don't have active memory for when I'm 3 years old. And, of course, very, very upset. shocked and alarmed. What are you doing? You're going to get hurt. And pull me down and so on and so forth. And then I start to freak out and start to cry because I was so close. Victory was almost mine. But then I was told, no, I was disciplined. No climbing. You don't do that. It's dangerous. You can get hurt, so on and so forth. And you'll go ahead and you'll ask us if you want a cookie. Were you good? Did you eat dinner? And so on and so forth. Some of the rules or whatever that we had in place. And so, okay, so they're giving me the answer, right? So what did I do? There was a conflict. I couldn't reach the thing. It was stressful. I had motivation to try to find an alternative that would work to get me to get to the cookie jar. It didn't work. All right, so we're back at square one again. And then there was another attempt, perhaps a day or two later, and I did the same exact thing and intercepted again. Apparently, I was very noisy when trying to be the kitchen cabinet climber. And then, after a time or two and getting some stern talkings to, I was told, you come to us if you really want a cookie, we'll get you a cookie. And you have to say, please. Yeah, all right. So onboarding other life skills, manners, so on and so forth. So eventually I go, I see, I want a cookie, I stop. I go to mom, dad, whichever parent. Can I have a cookie? Please. Oh, all right. What happened? I got a cookie. Take a look at the system here. There's a conflict, there's a stress, had some motivation to do something about it. I tried something a couple of times. It didn't work. I just got punished in the long run, but I kind of got handed the keys to the car and said, do this. And eventually I trusted them enough to give it a try. And I was successful. Oh, this is how I get what I want. I say, please, a 3-year-old brain, right? It's okay. So clearly a 3-year-old is not an adolescent, yet this process was still working. This is evident. We do this all the time. This is not exclusive to adolescence. This just becomes a little bit more complicated, a little bit more dressed up during adolescence. Now, where does this entire flowchart break down? What I mean by that is there's one critical moment in here where if we don't deal with something, nothing else happens. Stress. If we do not respond to stress, we don't get to motivation, we don't get to alternatives, we're not able to identify potential solutions. This is where there can be a lot of difficulties with values-based parenting, with parenting in general, and sometimes with our own teens' adolescent development themselves. Sometimes stress can be a little overwhelming. Sometimes a person can avoid stress. They can avoid stress by checking out mentally. They can avoid stress by acting out in other behaviors. One of my areas of specialization is in treating substance use. And so if an individual is using substances, what happens when you get high? You tend not to really feel stress. So a person doesn't necessarily learn some of the other life skills that would be necessary to kind of continue the maturation process and level up into adulting 101, right? So stress is definitely very, very important here. Now, it's not just teens that are experiencing a lot of changes during adolescent development. Parents, you're experiencing quite a few changes as well. Parenting a child is very different from parenting a teen, is very different from parenting a adult, young adult, whatever you want to call that 18 plus category. There's a lot of emphasis on the changes that the adolescent goes through. I've had very, very few opportunities where I've seen people really focus on the changes that the parent goes through during this process. So parents of teens end up peeling off the layers of responsibility that they've maintained for their children when they were still children. But at a certain point in time, our children turning into teens and teens turning into young adults need to learn the process of adulting. So parents, this requires your buy-in here. It also requires buy-in of the teens. The teens need to be willing to accept responsibility, and the parents need to be willing to relinquish it. And there is an exchange and interplay on a variety of different levels. Some of them are nominal. Some of them we might not have a problem with whatsoever. Kids got to learn how to do their laundry. Kids got to learn to bathe themselves, to wash themselves appropriately, and hopefully on a routine basis. I know sometimes things can get funky with teenagers in the scent department. Um, Teens need to eventually learn how to manage tasks, right? Being on top of schoolwork, getting to school on time. They need to wake themselves up in the morning. If they have obligations, if they're involved in sports or other activities or have a job, they need to be able to manage their schedules. Parents, that means that you need to be willing to not manage their schedules for them. You need to be willing to have them be a part of some conversations to be able to understand, oh, hey, like let's manage time together. What time do you get out of school? Okay, you can't start work at 3 o'clock if you get out of school at 2:50 because there's no way that you could get there in 10 minutes. They need to be involved in some of these conversations, just given some base level examples. Then there's also social situations, social conflicts. How do teens prepare to handle social conflicts themselves? Whereas when they are children, if there's social conflicts, sometimes parents talk to other parents. Kids have to learn how to adjust some of this themselves. I can't tell you the number of parents that I have, the number of families I have seen in treatment settings, whether they be more intensive or in just like routine therapy, outpatient counseling practice offices, where there are some very, very notable skills deficits for teens that should be, developmentally appropriately addressing certain tasks. And there can be a combination of the teen not being prepared to take on responsibility to try to wrestle with it, or the parent responding to potential anxieties of I don't want to see them get hurt. I believe that they're not mature enough to handle this yet. And it's like, well, if not now, then when? So yeah, just as I had said before, parents at times are unprepared for the upheaval of their norms or values, and any sign of a departure may end up leading to the parent wanting to reclaim responsibility of the developmental tasks. And then the flip side of it, sometimes others may not advocate for things that are important and let things go by the wayside. And so sometimes teens can pander on occasion. An example that was given that I really enjoyed, it stuck with me, and so I'll pass it along. Maybe this will ring true for you, is adolescent development tends to be a second coming of the terrible twos. And I'll tell you why. So envision a 2-year-old in a playground. Let's say they're in a sandbox, and let's say they're playing with toys in the sand. So they're playing, look over, parent is sitting on the bench. There's my safety. There's my security. I'm okay. Turn back to playing. They're still there. Good. I'm safe. And they keep on going, right? So sometimes what'll happen is the parent loving, adoring, doting onto their child. Oh, you're so cute. Let me come over here. Let me pick you up and give you a nice big hug and a kiss. And what's that 2-year-old going to do? No, stay away. I'm playing. You're interrupting me. So there's this constant push and pull. The child needs to know that the parent is there and parent is available in order to internalize a sense of safety and security. And at the same time, they don't want the parent to be too close. They don't want to be interfered with their playing, right? Isn't this what adolescence is? So our teenagers need our constant support and guidance. However, they need us to be at a distance so they can learn how to do it themselves. This is why the role of parenting shifts a little bit, because parenting a child, we're usually doing for, and parenting an adult is usually a little bit more consultative. Right? You're still their parents when they're an adult, but every now and then, they might come to you for a life problem. Yeah, so tax stuff. How do you do that? What about this? How do you set up an IRA? These are more adult questions. Maybe a more advanced teenager might be asking some of this. Hopefully, if your school has financial literacy courses, that is an active part of the conversation, but those are more adult type of questions. That's more consultative parenting. Parenting a child is more active. Parenting a teen is definitely somewhere smack in the middle. You can't be too close and you can't be too far. So, speaking of which, let's talk about some of these parenting skills. First things first, we want to keep the lines of communication open. And this picture here is intentional. What is this a picture of? It's some drawbridge in the middle of a rainforest that's made with wood. It feels like it would be rocky all over the place if you tried to get to the other side. Keeping communication lines with your open can sometimes feel very, very rocky and a very, very thin rope, right? Because there's a mix that potentially is going on here. We still have to have an active role of a parent being able to have boundaries, have guidelines, in some cases, needing to allow natural consequences to happen if our teens' behaviors kind of fall outside of the scope of appropriateness or outside of the scope of our values, so on and so forth. And yet, we don't want to be judging. We don't want to be constantly pointing out what's going wrong, because what happens if we're judging, if we're pointing out all of their downfalls, that's going to close the door. We want to keep communication lines open. So I'm going to be going over a couple of tools on how to do that in the next two slides. But so before diving into this particular set of skills, I do just want to ask, and I understand the nature of this presentation, I'm not going to get an answer, but has anyone heard of Brene Brown? I'm going to hope that there are some people that are familiar with her. If you are not, she is a social worker. She is a PhD psychologist. She is an author. She has a number of TED Talks. She has a podcast. She's kind of like the therapist Oprah. Just to give another reference point there, she's got a lot of great work, and so this set of skills or qualities, characteristics, comes from one of her books, Braving the Wilderness. She integrates this into several of her other works, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe this exact writing here comes from that book. So, braving skills I personally find them to be values, but they can certainly be skills for parenting. And we'll just do a quick rundown here. So number one, have boundaries. When we have boundaries, we're basically communicating, I trust you if you are clear about your boundaries and hold firm to them, and if you're clear about my boundaries and respect them. So isn't this something perfect to model for our kids, right? Because we're hoping that this is something that they're going to be able to do in their life. They're going to be able to have boundaries with friends, be able to have boundaries with let's say adults. Let's also say with activities. So, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, but all play is not the answer there. So we need to balance, we need to have some boundaries. And, your own family, you may have specific rules or values around how schoolwork is handled, in addition to being able to be social and participate in enjoyable activities, so on and so forth. So for ourselves as those in the parenting role, how are we demonstrating and being consistent with our boundaries while also respecting our children's boundaries? Reliability, very simply put, you do what you say, and I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words here. Do you do what you say you will do? Keep clear boundaries. Help us to say no, so that we don't offer too much and then not be able to deliver. And so again, with reliability here, we want to be able to be a constant. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. People can count on me. I am reliable. Next up, accountability. I can only trust you if you are willing to own your mistakes. Something that you'll notice as we go through here, there's a lot of focus on trust. In your relationship with your teens, it is on us to continually demonstrate or open up the lines of communication that we are trustworthy individuals, right? So if we're able to demonstrate our trustworthiness, that's going to help leagues with keeping communication lines open. And we're also giving them a template. We're modeling how important these skills are for them in their lives. Again, this is why I reference it as values. So accountability, I can only trust you if you are willing to make your own own your mistakes and then apologize and make amends. Allow me to do likewise. Very, very important here. So we need to demonstrate it, and then we want to hold our children accountable for their own accountability. We raise our hands and say, hey, my bad, I recognize this. Let me see if I can improve this for the next time. Let me try to make an active amends or a living amends. And then ideally holding our kids to that same level of accountability with the intent that they're going to internalize that value. Vault. I can trust that what I tell you is going to be held in confidence because you don't share things with me that are not yours to share. So kids learn that they can trust us with their confidence when we are able to keep confidences. They need to be able to see that. The piece that I do just want to clarify on here for parenting, because again, there might be a variety of different parenting situations. You may have a traditional married or partnered relationship where there are two or more individuals who are serving in this parent role. You may be a single parent. There may be a co-parenting role with parents that are no longer together, are separated, or divorced. The idea here is that anyone who is serving in a parenting role, that's a parental unit. We don't want to create divisions within that parental unit. That can actually fare very poorly for developing teens, especially for those that may have a desire or a motive to try to work splits between parents, conceal information from one but share with another. Sometimes that can foster several unhealthy traits in teens. But so, you know what? Information can be kept in private amongst parents. It doesn't need to be shared with your cousins, grandparents. So, the list can go on, so on and so forth. I just wanted to make that clarification there. It is important for parents to be aligned with each other when parenting or co-parenting their children. Next up is integrity. Choosing courage over comfort. I'm going to do or say the right thing even when it is the hard thing. It can be difficult for us to practice that quality or that value ourselves. However, it's so vitally important for our kids, especially when you consider the myriad of circumstances where this is going to be very important. And the situation that comes up quite a bit, especially when focusing on an audience for teens, is when it comes to social intimidation, bullying, harassment. Being able to stand up when there is an injustice and say, hey, I'm not cool with that. That's difficult for a team to stand up for another team. It's very, very helpful for their own development to be able to see other stakeholders in their lives being able to do the same thing, being able to practice integrity. Be non-judgmental. I can fall apart, ask for help, or be in struggle without being judged by you, and you can do the same with me. So our teens are going to mess up on occasion. They're going to act outside of our family values or potentially even their own personal values. We do not want to approach them from a place of judgment. That's going to cut lines of communication. That's going to foster shame and guilt inside of our kids. We don't want them connecting shame and guilt with our face, our words, our actions. And then finally, being generous. We can give critical feedback and be generous with it. We don't need to be judgmental. We want to be generous. So by demonstrating these skills consistently for our kids, not only are we building healthier relationships with them, but we're demonstrating to them that they can trust us. In addition to this, these actions, this consistency here is serving as a model or a template that hopefully they can play around with and figure out a style that works for themselves. I would feel remiss if I did not talk about oars. So for anyone that is not familiar with oars, this comes from a skills training in counseling called motivational interviewing or motivation enhancement therapy, which I know is going to be coming up in a few slides later. So OARS is an acronym. It stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summary. So parents, when engaging your teens, think about your oars. What do oars do if you're on a boat? They're going to help you to row in the right direction. So when I'm interacting with my child, am I asking open-ended questions, encouraging communication, wanting to hear them talk their perspective? Or am I asking closed-ended questions? Am I leading the witness and funneling them to get to the answer that I want them to have? Kids know what we're doing. We might not know what we're doing, but kids know what we're doing, and they can smell from a mile away if they have a seat at the table or if they're being pigeonholed and othered. Now, when I say othered, I'm the parent, you need to respect what I say, versus the, hey, I'm your parent, I have your best interest in mind, let's talk about this, help me understand what's going on, we can figure it out. Vast differences here. So we want to ask open-ended questions. Affirmations. We want to be able to praise, to point out the good. We're not going to be sprinkling cupcakes on top of turds. That's not what this is about. But we do want to make affirmations. So we are going to acknowledge when criticism is needed. We're going to do so non-judgmentally. We're going to do so generously, and we're also going to point out what's going right. We want to be able to provide reflections. Now, I know your reflections and summary, these are like hardcore therapy skills, but they're very, very important for just like people in general. Oars are good conversation skills. They also teach oars to employers, anyone that has like teams or staff working under them. This can be really, really great for organizational development as well when talking about how to motivate your staff to be able to work towards a specific goal accomplishment or I know some businesses call them rocks, but anyway. So a reflection is, excuse me, is really being able to talk about and reflect back what your teen is sharing with you. So we're actively listening, we're letting them know that we're taking in what they're saying. So it's not just they're saying something and we're going completely on to a next thought. We want to reflect back the thoughts that they're sharing. There's a variety of different types of reflections. Sometimes they're basic, sometimes they can be a little bit more in depth. Sometimes we're able to get in touch with the emotion of the situation and reflect that emotion back. That might not be so important for our purpose here, but there's a variety of ways that we can reflect back what we're hearing from our teens when we're encouraging conversation. And then finally, inserting some summaries every now and then. When we're getting into some like good in-depth conversation, it can sometimes be very, very useful to take a moment to just like gel the information together, to kind of summarize some of the highlights of what's happening. Similar to reflections, there's a variety of different ways that we can summarize, might not be pertinent for our purposes here today. However, there can be, again, simple summaries, there can be summative summaries, there can be summaries that can help us drift onto another topic. But that type of content would be for a different time. But all of these skills, specifically the braving skills and the oars, are going to be so very important to keeping communication open with your teams. That's the biggest takeaway here when it comes to parenting skills. Next, just to touch on therapy for therapeutic tools. Benefits of therapeutic services. Again, I'm a little bit biased here. I am a therapist, but really just to highlight a few. Number one, straight up, objectivity, right? So if there's ever some struggle points between parents and teens, parents and children, and sometimes we're trying to hear our teens' perspective while also sharing our own. Sometimes a common retort can be, "You don't understand. You're only going to see it your way. You're only trying to convince me to see it your way." Sometimes the benefit of being in a therapeutic circumstance, whether it's individually with the teen or in a family therapy type of situation, there is an uninvolved third party that is able to give objective observations of communication style, objective observations of strategies, so on and so forth. So a third party that doesn't have a vested interest, to just be able to hold up a mirror so that everyone else in the family can see a little bit better what's going on. Non-judgmental, non-punitive approach. Again, one of the braving skills was being non-judgmental. However, this is a third removed party. Sometimes when emotions are uninvolved a little bit, it can be understood a little bit easier that this is a safe space to be able to dive through things and I'm not going to be judged for it. The added component here is the non-punitive approach. If I'm a teen and I'm arguing with parents, there could be a potential risk of, am I going to get in trouble or am I going to get punished if I don't do this, if I don't agree? At the end of the day, if there's just something that's a rule and I don't follow it, there's some version of a barrier there. With a therapist, the therapist doesn't have a role to be able to punish. So there's that added benefit. And then finally, the evidence-based practice and skill. So this isn't dependent on a particular person's style. If a person is skilled and trained and they're following by these evidence-based practices, this is going to be somewhat uniform. Ideally, it is going to be somewhat uniform from practitioner to practitioner. So as I had mentioned before when I had discussed the ORs on one of the previous slides, motivational interviewing and motivation enhancement training can be very, very important when considering values-based counseling, being able to really help a person take a look at their actions and their behaviors. Are their insides matching their outsides? My insides, my values, my North Star, what's important to me, are my actions, my outsides matching what I believe and what is really, really crucial for me as a person. Sometimes we're in conflict. Our insides and our outsides are not aligned. It can be helpful to have that outside third party to help a person sort through that. And then the last piece on here, there's a specific type of therapy called ACT, or acceptance commitment therapy, that is very much so about integrating values into the therapy practice. I integrate ACT into a lot of the work that I do. But again, I'm not going to be deep diving into the specifics here. That is a whole other presentation. When to consider counseling. If you're coming across your teen rejecting or refusing developmentally appropriate tasks, this is something to pay attention to. If your teen is absolutely refusing the responsibility of getting up in time for school, what's the best predictor of future behavior? Past behavior. What's the plan for after high school? If your child, if I was going to say that student, but if your child does want to go away, live independently after high school, perhaps go to a college, go to vocational training, so on and so forth, how are they going to get themselves up for their classes, for their job, for whatever their responsibilities are going to be? This is the training ground for adulting. And again, this is just one very, very nominal example. There's a lot of different developmentally appropriate tasks that can be refused or rejected along the way. But funnily enough, is that waking up themselves is a common one that we see. So family conflicts surrounding value-based things. Themes. So one of the topics that can come up quite a bit can be dishonesty. Another topic that can come up quite a bit, again, of course, one of my areas of specialization is in treating substance use disorders. And so when there's a big value difference in regards to the role of substance or the safety of substance in a person's life. If your teen is evidencing high risk behaviors, please At the end of the day, you need to be able to rest your head on your pillow, be able to say that I did everything that I can for my child. If there's high risk situations that are going on, please do reach out. I know that within the majority of school systems in the state of New Jersey, there is this role, the student assistance counselor. Mr. Lupus is one of the student assistance counselors for your district. If there's any concerns for high risk behaviors, please reach out to those supports that are built into your school district. And Mr. Lupus and his counterpart for the junior and senior grades can help guide you to an appropriate clinician. And then finally, another consideration to possibly look into counseling, if there is a need to align parenting styles or if there are co-parenting issues. So what I mean by this, in a family that has a partnered or married set of parents, sometimes parenting styles between the two might not be on the same page. And so sometimes some brief solution-focused counseling can really help parents get more on the same page so you can be consistent in raising your children and teens. And then, of course, for co-parenting issues, in family situations where the parents do not live together, there is a separation or a divorce, making sure that there's parental alignment amongst multiple households can be important, right? Is the curfew somewhat consistent? Is it still the child's responsibility to wake themselves up at both houses, so on and so forth? You get the idea. Finally, we're going to jump into the values identification activity. Now, in general, when I do this activity to groups of professionals, when I have run this activity in therapeutic groups, or even just done this in an individual session, I have some worksheets that I hand out with this. And of course, we don't have the benefit of that in the format of this recorded webinar. But I'm going to walk you through a version of it. There's a lot of different ways that we can process it. I'm really going to just keep it focused on what may be pertinent for your purposes as a parent here. And so this is why I asked towards the beginning of the presentation, if you could grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, and hopefully participate on your own at home. I know I won't be able to ask questions that you'll be able to answer in this format here. So first things first, there's a little bit of an experiential spiel that I give with this presentation. Now, I normally start off with asking, like, what are values? What do we identify as being valuable in our lives? Now, I know that earlier we had gone through and operationally defined what values are, but when we break it down into what's valuable in our lives, different people may shout out some different ideas. I like to give a general overview as to the types or the categories of values that we might consider. First and foremost, we're human beings, we're social creatures. People in our lives can be valuable. And so for people, we have individual people, and then there's groups of people. So individuals, mom, dad, sister, brother, children, so on and so forth. And then groups of people, family, friends, coworkers, colleagues. We can go on from there. Teams, certain institutions that have been meaningful or impactful in my life, right? There's no right or wrong when identifying values. We're just trying to kind of like lay the landscape as to different things that a person might consider. So people in our lives, individuals or groups. There's material items. Sometimes we can get a little bit self-judgmental when we find ourselves thinking about material items, and I'm going to ask that we suspend judgment. Material items do play a role. They do have some level of importance in our life. I joke all the time, as superficial as I feel towards it, so this is me judging myself, my cell phone. My cell phone is of vital importance to me, just the way that life is currently existing now. This is my calendar. This is my direction giver. This is the way that I'm able to see the face of people that are close to me in my life who live miles and miles and miles away. There's a lot of different things that this device does for me. It is a material object and it is important to me. So just other examples of material items, phone, clothes, the roof over your head, money, cars. All of these things are material items. They may be something that is of value to you. Next, we talk about ideals. So ideals, these might be perhaps virtues or standards that we hold ourselves to. And so I'll give some of the classics, and some of them have already been discussed in the presentation on that braving exercise. Honesty, integrity, loyalty, fidelity. There's a whole lot of words that end in Y that can be on these ideal lists. Education might be an ideal. So not necessarily the institution of education, but being educated, knowledge. So these are intangible items. They're more ideals that can also be very important. We have characteristics, qualities, traits, being funny, being loving, being carefree, humor. The list can go on and on. Another category might be emotions. I can value love. I can value joy. I can also value anger or sadness, right? So again, just to highlight, there's people in our lives, there's material items, there's ideals or intangible items, characteristics or traits, and then emotions. So when going through this activity, I like to give that definition of what values are, highlight over the different categories, and then ask a person to sit down, take some time, maybe it's somewhere between 5 or 10 minutes. We're not going to take that 5 or 10 minutes here, but if you're viewing this as a recording, you can hit the pause button and on your piece of paper, take 5 or 10 minutes to identify 20 values that come to mind. They don't have to be evenly allocated between the various different categories. Just a representative sample. What are the first things that come to mind when you think of what's important to you, your North Star, the principles that you like to live your life by, or the things that you like to prioritize above everything else in your life? So again, if you're viewing this and you do want to actually do the activity, hit the pause button and write that down, and then you can press play again. And so what we do here is, after we've been able to identify our values, and again, ideally, I like to say 20, it's really just a representative sample. In reality, we have so many more things that we value, and truly, there's a hierarchy, right? So some of our values are going to be more valuable than other values that we end up putting down. A person may realize a little bit later, oh, I completely forgot about this value that's really important to me. That's more important than some of the things that I listed. How did I forget about that? Fine. That's okay. Continue to add stuff. It's all good. And so here, I just have like a small spattering of several values that are on here. You may recognize some things and be able to relate. Yes, this is something that's important to me as well. You may have other things that are a lot more important to you than some of those items on here. There's no judgment. There's no right or wrong. It's just what's important to you. What I ask that you do is you take a look at your values that you wrote down and really take them in. The expression that I give here is that our values are like our own individual DNA. It makes us who we are. It doesn't matter how many times I've done this activity, whether it's been individually or in groups. I really can't even numerate for you how many times I've done this exercise. I have never seen the same exact set of values. This, for me, really does just reinforce the notion that our values are our emotional DNA. It completely individuates us. The idea here is that when I am living my best life, when I am being my authentic self, I am living a life that is aligned with my values. My insides, what's important to me, is matching my outsides. What I'm doing in my life, the things that I am honoring and adhering to in my life, the people that I am involving in my life, that I'm identifying as stakeholders for me, right? So when I'm doing awesome, all of these things are active and present and felt in my life. So I'm going to ask you to scan over the values that you've been able to identify. Just take them in. And I'm going to ask you in 20 seconds to get rid of 5 of them. And when I say get rid of, it's not that they no longer exist or have never existed. It's acting as if you no longer care about these things that are so important to you. And so at this point in the activity, I would actually kind of crank up the drama a little bit and I would count to 20 out loud, rather loudly, and ramping up the volume a little bit towards the end. It tends to create a little bit of tension. And then I would ask, what are people feeling? What was that process like? Depending on the audience, the maturation of the audience, how familiar we were with each other, I might get a variety of responses. I've had teens and young adults curse me out. How dare I ask them to get rid of these things that are important to them. I've had other individuals really reflect on the anxiety that was experienced during the process, a lot of anger, some shock, some sadness, some surprise that like, oh, I'm surprised I even considered getting rid of that one. Like, what was I thinking? The point here is when we're put in a forced situation where our values are in jeopardy, it creates a lot of emotion, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can move forward in this exercise if we were meeting in person. Of course, that's not the case, so I won't go down that path. But what I will prompt you to do is to take a look at all of your values that you have written down, even the ones that you may have crossed out or imagined that they're no longer important to me. What I ask you to do is you take a look at everything and circle the values that you believe you are fully content with right now. This value is fully present in my life. I'm fully satisfied. I don't feel like I'm lacking. I don't feel that this area of my life is unfulfilled. Circle those things. A majority of individuals would be able to identify that there's some items that are circled and there's some items that are not circled. And so then we can talk and have some questions about those items more specifically, right? So it's, tell me, why did this particular value become important to you? If you want to engage in the exercise, you might pause the video and take a look at a couple of the values that are on there, perhaps some of the values that aren't circled. This isn't being fulfilled in my life right now. How did this item become very important to me? There tends to be lots of stories, personal stories in our life behind why something is important. It's okay to explore that. I then also want to invite you to identify 1, 2, maybe 3 if you're aggressive. Identify 3 things that you're really missing right now that you could use more of in your life. You might want to put a star next to those ones. And then you might want to develop a plan. You know what? This particular value is really important to me. I'm kind of not feeling it right now. How do I get more of this in my life? How do I practice more of this? How do I make sure that I feel fulfilled in these areas? Because again, if I'm being my best self, I'm able to integrate these items of importance in my life. Again, there's many, many different ways we can process through these type of activities. We can have separate conversations if you'd prefer to. My information for getting in contact will be at the end. And of course, I can exchange an email for people that have further questions. But this is a good exercise for anyone to do. And parents, this is a good exercise, whether you're doing it as the literal exercise or even just a conversation to have with your kids, your teens, your young adults. What's important in your life right now? Like, how fulfilled, how satisfied are you? What's missing? What do you need more of? Let's have some of these in depth emotional conversations. And as we start to work towards a close, we're at the tail end of our program, roughly about like 15 minutes left. I want to put some things together, hopefully have some walking away points here. So, of course, I would hope that we're all aligned and on the same page. We want to join with our teens. It can be very, very helpful to be open with your kids about your own experiences and your own personal values. How did you acquire those values? One of those prompt questions that I asked before, why did this become important to me? So, just for a moment, if we can pause and go back to that adolescent development slide where I was kind of like going through that equation of how we go through um, uh, in essence, it's skill development, but also values acquisition, right? So how did I find out that holding on to these things were going to be important to me? They were going to be useful. They were going to lead to a more fulfilling and satisfied life. Having these conversations with your kids can help serve as a breeding ground for their own contemplation about some of their own conflicts or stresses that they're experiencing right now. How do I work through some of these stresses? If we're able to integrate our values, if we're able to keep our North Star, our guiding principles in mind, our gut reaction will hopefully be better informed on what's the right thing to do. What do I need to do here? Our kids need to see people who've successfully gone through and done this. We can be those models for them. Helps to keep the doors open to be able to have some of these deep conversations. And of course, we want to encourage conversations of conflicts within their own value system. This is huge with our teenagers. So let's take a look at and assume that if we were to do this with your kids, that one of their values would have been family or mom or dad, right? I would imagine that they would also have values in there of friends, or maybe there's a particular best friend, or maybe perhaps there's a romantic partner, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or some version of a significant other, right? Values conflicts. What if I have an obligation or responsibility with one person or thing that's important to me that conflicts with another person or thing that's important to me? The way that I can routinely see this come up with teens is I love my parents. I want to follow the rules. I don't want them to be disappointed in me because of whatever circumstance or something that's come up. I need to be somewhere or I have a certain curfew, so on and so forth, and it conflicts with me being able to go to a party, hang out with my significant other, or something with friends, right? So I have two things that are important to me, and there's a conflict between them. That's a stressful situation. We got to go back to the equation, right? Life isn't always going to be peachy. It's not going to go my way. There's going to be a conflict. It's going to create stress. How do I work through this? Hopefully, in a way that's not compromising either of my values. I'm not lying or ditching my friends. I'm not lying or disobeying my parents. Sometimes it's not so black and white. It's not so easy. This is a very, very complicated process that our teens have to go through. They need to go through these struggles in order to develop and mature. How do we keep our communication lines open to help our kids navigate through some of these decisions in a non-judgmental way that is still going to hold them accountable, and we're going to be able to practice integrity while we're doing it? Recognizing some of the words that I had with braving, right? All right. So parents, validate your children's pains as well as their successes. You never want to have a buck up buttercup type of response to your children's woes. That's very, very dismissive. It's very, very invalidating. You want to acknowledge their woes. It sucks. I get it. I would really hate to be in the situation that you're in right now. I remember being there as a kid. I've had to make some very, very difficult decisions. I can empathize with where you're at, right? So we want to validate their pains. And as I said a little bit earlier with one of our ORS skills, affirmations, we want to validate their successes. What's going right? We want to validate their challenges as well as their accomplishments, their fears as well as their intentions. And finally, when we partner with our children on their dreams, we're keeping those lines of communication open. Ideally, we're going to be able to hear and be filled in on, like, what's the point for them? What are they going towards? What is all this a buildup for? Their dreams. We're going to partner with our kids on their dreams and have an opportunity to be present and walk with them through that process. They're the ones that need to make these decisions. They're the ones that need to be able to figure things out, hopefully keeping their values in mind, with you serving as a guide because you've been able to model your values, the values that you're looking to instill in your family. One little note here: consider your parenting style. Some of you may already be familiar with the 4 parenting styles: permissive, authoritative, authoritarian, or neglectful. You're going to see that on the bottom and then to the left, there's also like an X and Y axis. So the Y axis, or the arrow going up, is for responsiveness. The X axis, the arrow going across, is one for demandingness. So the parenting styles towards the right tend to have more demands on the child. There's more responsibility. There's more things that need to be done. And then the styles towards the top, they're going to be more responsive emotionally to your children, to their needs, to their fears, to their experience. We're going to be more open and empathetic in that way. So neglectful parenting is neither responsive to our kids and holds no demand on them. Authoritative parenting is very, very responsive. It's very inclusive of our children while still holding them to standards and responsibilities, right? So the ideal here is we want to, as much as possible, gear towards that authoritative parenting style. So even just a moment, taking a look at some of the descriptors for the other parenting styles. If there's components of our own parenting that we can see in those other areas, let's not judge ourselves, because again, that's not healthy for us. But we do want to be able to note, you know what, we can shift towards problem solving. We can shift towards having clear boundaries and expectations, having open communications, and allowing natural consequences to happen. Our kids need to face it. Final thoughts as we go about closing. This is a sentiment that I heard in my very, very early therapist days, and I like to share it loud for anyone that will hear it. People start to heal the moment they feel heard. Let's keep the communication lines open with our kids so that we can hear them. And once we're able to demonstrate to our kids that we hear them, we're there for them, and we're not judging, they'll start to move along. So I appreciate your time and attention. I do want to give that opportunity for questions if there are any. And of course, if you have any questions that you would like to submit privately, you can do so through Mr. Lupus, or of course, I have an email address that's listed here on this page. You can feel free to email any questions privately as well. Thank you again.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. So we'll just hang out for a few minutes. If anybody has any questions and feels like chatting away in the chat box with their question, go ahead and we can answer them. And also just want everybody to know that we're going to have Paul back again at the end of April for another presentation. Focuses a little bit more on, I want to say, use the word addiction. Is that okay?
So adolescent compulsive behaviors.
All right. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah.
So he'll be back again end of April, and we'll be setting out some more information regarding that presentation. So again, thank you everybody for joining again tonight, and we'll hang out for a few minutes to see if anybody has any questions in the chat.